Hello, everyone. This is Jed Distler. I'm the official Gramophone magazine blogger for the 19th International Chopin Competition here in Warsaw. I'm recording this episode of the Chopin Report just about an hour before we all pile into the Philharmonic for the third and final evening of the concerto round. And we're going to know the final results from the jury tonight. And there's a lot of commotion going on here in the press room because there is so much activity. There's a lot that needs to be done before we find out the results tonight. And I don't mind this commotion. It's like being in New York's Grand Central Station. I'm kind of used to it. And, every time I walk over here to the press lounge to record these videos, I see long lines of people queued up hoping to score an extra ticket. And I think it's easier to get tickets to a Taylor Swift concert than to the Chopin competition finals, believe me. So I'm going to run down last night's events. First, the pianist Mio Shindo was at her very best in the Chopin Polonaise Fantasy, and she served up a lot of textural contrast, and she kept this baby afloat. She really sustained this piece of music, which is difficult to hold together. And it was always moving forward. And she really went for broke in those climactic triplets and octaves, that part, which I can barely sing, of course. But when she played the E minor concerto, the concerto number 1, I felt that she was sort of enacting the slow movement rather than expressing it, because Chopin often marks semplice in his score. Mio Shindo imbued these long and eloquent lines with a kind of anguish that I don't think really rings true in this music. So in that sense, I thought that Zeyu Wang's performance of the same movement was more natural in its ebb and flow, and it just let the music be itself, you know what I mean? But it's clear that Mio Shindo shows up to win, and mainly to win, and that's her way. That's how she prepares, and like Jerry Seinfeld says, there's not that there's anything wrong with that. But this sense of tunnel vision determination that I hear in how she played the last movement, she kind of charged through the concerto's finale, and it was fabulous pianism, don't get me wrong, and worked out like crazy. And I admire and respect all the finish that went into it, but you don't have to play the finale of the Chopin E minor concerto as if you're playing the finale of the Rachmaninoff Third Concerto. But getting back to Zeyu Wang, she had some trouble focusing in the Polonaise Fantasy because she had a couple of stumbles at the beginning, unfortunately, and I think that threw her. And obviously, she was angry with herself. And I think the anger spilled over into the Chopin Concerto's first movement. She also played the E minor, let me remind you. But her finale, though, got better and better as it went along. And it seemed that she was just a little bit off of her best game. But I will give Zeyu Wang a special Jed Distler prize for her fantastic B minor scherzo that closed her stage 3 recital, and that brought it to a firecracker of a close. And that performance is a real keeper. Now, some readers and viewers have clearly enjoyed Piotr Alexicz in the F minor concerto more than I did. I would have wanted more variety and articulation in the outer movements and sharper rhythmic focus, especially in the finale's coda, where he got a little bit off with the orchestra. It wasn't a big deal, but there was a little edge there where they got temporarily out of sync. I mean, just for a split second, really. But he did play a wonderful Polonaise Fantasy with real dynamic contrast and a lot of variety in his sound. Yes, he brought that to the piece. And his pacing was all in proportion, and you got a sense of the narrative unfolding. I really enjoyed his Polonaise Fantasy a lot. However, and my friend David Hurwitz, in his videos on his YouTube channel, when he's recommending recordings, when he saves the best for last, he says, however. So this is my however moment. And sorry, Dave, if I'm stealing your catchphrases. But however, out of the 84 competitors that I have encountered over these past few weeks, I've heard dozens of highly capable pianists. I've heard many, many professional level artists who can play anything, anywhere. They are so ready. And I heard a great number of really outstanding musicians and very mindful virtuosos. And I heard some uncommonly gifted artists in very special ways, and some genuine original minds. And I heard one genius. Now, I know this may startle some of you, and I know I'm going to stir things up in chat rooms, and that some of you are not going to agree with what I'm going to say, and I anticipate a lot of feedback and maybe some hate mail. I don't know. But I always think carefully before I use the word genius to describe a classical performer. The last time I did this with a pianist, it was with Magdalene Ho last year after judging the Chapel Awards at the Royal College of Music in London. And also after Magdalene Ho was so inexplicably eliminated from the Van Cliburn competition only after the first round. You know, I wanted to reach out to the jury and say, hey, you guys don't know genius when you hear it. But of course, I behaved myself. Anyway, hearing William Yang again last night when he played the Polonaise Fantasy and the Concerto No. 2 in F minor proved again to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is an artist in a class by himself. And I'm going to try to pinpoint just what I think makes William Yang's artistry so special and distinctive, besides the fact that he sounds like no other pianist in this competition. First of all, William Yang has clearly absorbed in his bloodstream and in his fingers many aspects of the history of Chopin performance practice, at least what we can hear on record. But his performances totally avoid what I call received opinion, meaning that he approaches every phrase, every dynamic directive, every expressive indication, very much in the way that an art conservator might restore a painting by an old master, by like removing decades of accumulated dust and grime, or to try and replicate pigments that have fallen out of modern use. Yet these pigments can be reasonably restored by modern means. And in the case of the Polonaise Fantasy, it was a matter of judging the dynamics so that the fortes don't sound like fortissimos, or else how William Yang contoured the contrapuntal lines to follow them through to their final destinations from beginning to end, or else the way he created a hierarchy of climaxes so that the peak climax really stands out from the pack. And this is very much like how Sergei Rachmaninoff shaped his piano interpretations of other composers in quest of a central quote-unquote point. So in both the Polonaise Fantasy and throughout the F minor concerto, William Yang achieved all of these characteristics that I've been talking about, and doing so with the utmost pianistic finesse and focus and sense of purpose. Accents and inner voices and dynamic gradations that may have eluded listeners and pianists in the past turn up all the time in his interpretations, but not as attention-getting devices, but as components of the score. And furthermore, Andrei Boreyko and his Warsaw Philharmonic musicians seem to perform much more attentively with Yang at the piano than at any other time during the evening. And this resulted in the most integrated and mindfully detailed soloist ensemble collaboration out of all of the final round performances so far. I mean, we have 3 of them to come, and I'm very curious what we're going to find tonight. Now, sure enough, with William Yang, one may carp about this or that detail. One may complain that he doesn't play loudly enough in certain passages, but he does internalize and own his interpretive choices, and he has the courage of his convictions. Now, whether all of this or not qualifies as genius, that's not for me to say. Although, in my heart, I do want to use the G word to describe William Yang. But I remember hearing the great Liszt and Chopin scholar Alan Walker years and years ago describe the difference between talent and genius. I don't remember the exact quote. I'm sure many of you will know the exact quote, so you can fill me in. But in essence, the quote goes something like this, and I have to look at my cheat sheet here. A great virtuoso or a great talent is like a marksman who can hit a target that others cannot hit. And sure enough, we have been overrun with great virtuosos these past weeks here in Warsaw. However, a genius is like a marksman who can hit a target that others cannot even see. And that's how Alan Walker described Franz Liszt as one who hits targets that others can't see. And these words, in my unhumble opinion, readily apply to William Yang. But more importantly, and I think you'll agree with me, these words also apply to Frédéric Chopin. From Warsaw, this is Jed Distler, and thank you so much for watching the Chopin Report. So until tomorrow, stay well, take care, and be kind to one another. We need kindness more than ever.